then helped Ivan to his feet. Supporting him between them, they painstakingly made their way up the stairs, over the fence, and through the forest until they reached Tamaku. Once home, they got Ivan into bed, hoping a night's rest would help. The next morning, Ivan's pain was worse. Still convinced it would pass, he endured another 3 days as his legs swelled and his health declined. For days after the injury, he was in such agony that he finally agreed to go to the hospital. When asked what had happened, he lied, claiming a tree had fallen on him, not wanting to admit to scavenging for scrap. The doctors believed him and began treating the crush injury, but nothing seemed to help. His pain increased, swelling worsened, and overall his condition deteriorated rapidly. Roughly a week after being admitted, 10 or 11 days after the accident, doctors walked in to find him dead. His kidneys had failed suddenly, and no one could explain why. The family buried Ivan, still bewildered by how a leg injury could lead to such an abrupt death. Days later, their young, healthy dog suddenly died without warning. Before they could process that, Ivan's stepson woke up one morning complaining of illness, his hands covered in blisters and boils as though badly burned. He insisted he hadn't burned them. Taken to the hospital, the boy revealed he had been going through Ivan's belongings and using tools from his toolbox. The doctors, already aware of the strange deaths, suspected something was wrong. They called the authorities, who arrived in full hazmat suits, evacuated the house, and swept it with radiation detectors. The readings led them to a closet containing Ivan's toolbox. Inside was an odd piece of scrap metal, the only one Ivan had taken from the cellar on their trip. The brothers had unknowingly broken into an abandoned nuclear waste storage facility, bypassing the front gates and their warning signs by climbing a side fence. The small metal briefcases they saw on the lower shelves were radiation shields containing radioactive material. When the heavy drum fell, it smashed open one of these cases, scattering its contents. Ivan had pocketed a piece, unknowingly carrying a fatal dose of radiation pressed against his body. By the time he returned home, he was already doomed. The dog, who often slept on Ivan's jacket, absorbed enough radiation to be killed as well. The boy's injuries came from briefly handling the metal while moving it to the toolbox. Miraculously, the stepson and the rest of the family, including Ivan's brothers, fully recovered, though months later the grandmother died unexpectedly, leading many to believe it was from delayed radiation exposure. In 2017, 71-year-old Bernard Gore, a retired man from Tasmania, and his wife Angela traveled to Sydney to visit their daughter, as they had done many times before. Their tradition was to spend the first day entirely at her house. Then the next morning Angela would go shopping alone, with Bernard meeting her later for lunch at the Westfield Center Mall, famous for its food. Got it. You want me to rewrite this in one flowing, cinematic style with added emotions and natural pauses, so it sounds like a human voiceover when read aloud, without changing the story. I'll keep the pacing tight, add emotional beats, and insert subtle pronunciation/intonation cues where needed so your AI voiceover sounds realistic. Here's your rewritten script. Before leaving the house that morning, Angela confirmed with her husband, Bernard, that they'd meet for lunch at the Westfield Center Mall. That day, Angela ended up doing her shopping there. Around lunchtime, she glanced at her watch. It was time to meet him. She stepped out of the store she was in and made her way to the food court. Their meeting spot was right in front of one of their favorite restaurants. She sat down, scanning the busy food court for her husband, but she didn't see him anywhere. She checked the time again, a couple of minutes early. So she picked up a menu and started browsing, thinking about what she'd order. But then, 15 minutes passed, and Bernard still wasn't there. Angela pulled out her phone and called him. No answer. But that wasn't unusual for Bernard, so she didn't panic just yet. She tried again and again. Each time, nothing. Frustration began to creep in. She thought, maybe he got sidetracked. Bernard loved to window shop. That had to be it. Annoyed, she stood, left her table, and started looking for him, peeking into shop windows, glancing over her shoulder toward the food court in case he showed up. 30 minutes went by. No sign of him. Maybe he thought we were meeting at our daughter's house first, she reasoned. He's probably still there, waiting for me. She turned toward the mall exit, but halfway there, a chilling thought stopped her in her tracks. What if Bernard was lost? Recently, he'd been showing early signs of dementia. It wasn't severe yet, but he had begun forgetting things. And if he got confused, He might not know where he was. Now worried, Angela hurried out of the mall and walked quickly toward her daughter's house nearby. The whole way, she reassured herself that Bernard would be there. But when she arrived, her daughter shook her head. Bernard had left 2 hours earlier to meet her. No one had seen or heard from him since. Both women grew anxious, but decided the best thing was to stay put, in case Bernard came back. Hours passed. By 8 p.m., 6 hours since anyone had seen him, there was still no sign. Angela called the police. Officers contacted mall security, who searched the food court and nearby stores. Nothing. They reviewed surveillance footage but told police Bernard never entered or exited the mall that day. Angela was baffled. She told them the only places he could have gone were the mall or their daughter's house. She also mentioned his dementia, but reassured them that if he got confused, he would usually just sit down and wait for help. Police widened their search to the streets around the mall. Angela and her daughter retraced the path from the house to the mall, looking for clues. But night fell, and they went home, hoping for news in the morning. The next day, nothing. No Bernard. No clues. Weeks passed without a trace. Then, on January 27th, 3 weeks later, a maintenance worker was walking through a staff-only passageway in the mall. It was a dim, concrete tunnel looping around the outside of the building. At the end of a rarely used hallway, he noticed something: equipment stacked against the wall. Strange, no one would leave gear here. He walked closer. The lighting was poor, but as he approached, he suddenly froze. What he saw sent him running, straight outside to call the police. Here's what the missed footage would have shown on January 6th. Bernard walked into the food court before Angela arrived, but he looked confused. Instead of heading to their meeting spot, he turned, pushed open an emergency exit door, and stepped through. It closed behind him. The Westfield Center Mall wasn't just huge, it was a maze. 6 floors, nearly 300 shops and restaurants. And hidden behind staff-only and emergency doors, almost 8 miles of narrow, windowless stairwells and tunnels wrapping around the building. Once Bernard stepped inside, that door locked. And the only way back would have been to completely exit the mall and somehow find his way around from the outside. To get out of where Bernard had wandered, he would have needed to reach one very specific exterior fire exit, several floors below him. The only way there was by following a trail of confusing, inconsistent signage scattered along the walls. If you knew exactly what you were doing, you'd head down a hallway, find a certain stairwell, go down a couple of levels, then, without much in the way of signs, somehow realize you'd reached the correct floor. From there, you'd walk down yet another hallway, into a maze of more hallways, until finally, you'd see a plain, unremarkable exit door. That was the way out. For someone thinking clearly, this route was already a challenge. But Bernard was not thinking clearly. He was confused, disoriented, and very likely didn't understand where he was, what he was doing, or even why he was there. So instead of following the correct path, he simply began wandering. He passed the one stairwell that, while complicated, could have eventually taken him out of the building. He didn't even glance at it. He just kept walking deeper and deeper into the wrong part of the building. Eventually, he entered a staff-only section, an even more bewildering place. No signs, endless concrete walls, almost every door locked. As he navigated this cold, echoing maze, his confusion must have deepened. At some point, he may have begun calling out for help, but the thick walls would have swallowed his voice. The only way anyone could have heard him was if they were in that same hallway. And tragically, almost no one ever was. This section of tunnels was rarely, if ever, used by staff. Making matters worse, mall security was supposed to check these 8 miles of tunnels and stairwells regularly to ensure no one had gotten lost inside. But over time, those checks stopped. And in this particular stretch of the maze, there were no cameras, no cell phone reception, no way for Bernard to reach anyone, even if he tried. He was completely alone. Hours, maybe days, passed as Bernard wandered, hitting locked door after locked door, reaching one dead end after another. Then, at some point, he turned a corner and saw it. A chair, pushed up against the wall. And like he always did when confused, Bernard went straight to it. He sat down and waited, waiting for a passerby, waiting for help, waiting for his family to find him. But help never came. And there, in that chair, Bernard passed away. It wasn't until January 27th, 3 weeks later, that a maintenance worker discovered him. Following his death, Westfield Center Mall announced sweeping changes to their security procedures, promising to better track people on their property.